I never thought I'd see the day my own daughter would look at me with such pure contempt. Just 1 week after my total knee replacement, I was helpless, a prisoner in her luxurious Denver home. A place built on my savings but that felt as foreign and cold as a hospital morgue. The silence of the house was a living thing, broken only by the angry, insistent throbbing in my leg and the distant, cheerful chatter from downstairs. They were laughing. My daughter, Jessica, a surgeon whose hands I once guided, and her husband, Mark, a man whose ambition I had funded. They were celebrating something, their voices like tinkling glass, while I was upstairs crawling. A white-hot poker of pain shot up from my knee with every agonizing inch I dragged myself across the cold, imported hardwood floor. I could see the dust bunnies gathered against the baseboards, little gray ghosts in the afternoon light. My throat was raw, a desert of thirst and unshed tears from calling her name. "Jessica, please," I whispered, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space of the master guest suite they'd put me in, a room as impersonal as a hotel. Finally, her footsteps, quick and impatient, echoed on the stairs. She appeared in the doorway, a vision in a silk blouse, her hair perfectly styled. She wasn't looking at me but at her designer watch, a gift from me last Christmas. "Mom, what are you doing? Mark and I have that dinner with the hospital board in an hour. You can't be serious." Her voice wasn't laced with concern. It was dipped in pure annoyance. "I've been calling for 20 minutes, I rasped, the humiliation a burning fire in my cheeks. "I need to use the bathroom. I need my pain medication." She sighed, a dramatic theatrical sound that was meant for me to hear. "We can't hear you from downstairs. You know that. This house has soundproofing." She helped me up, her movements efficient and detached. Her grip firm but without a trace of warmth. It was the grip of a clinician handling a difficult patient, not a daughter helping her mother. Back in bed, the thin sheets feeling like sandpaper against my skin, Mark appeared in the doorway, already in his tailored suit, smelling of expensive cologne. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, his eyes glued to the screen of his phone as he typed. "Mom needs her medication," Jessica said, her voice tight with resentment as she reapplied her lipstick in the hallway mirror. Mark's face darkened. "Again? Didn't she just take it 3 hours ago?" I lay there, invisible, a piece of furniture, as they discussed my basic human needs as if I were a malfunctioning appliance they were forced to deal with. I tried to reach for the pill bottle on the nightstand myself, just to end the conversation, but the simple movement sent a wave of nausea and blinding pain through me. No, I'll get it," Mark snapped, his patience clearly gone. He thrust the bottle and a glass of water at me without making eye contact. That's when it happened. My fingers, clumsy and weak from the medication and the pain, fumbled with the childproof cap. The bottle slipped, hitting the floor and scattering the small white pills across the gleaming wood like tiny seeds of my own failure. "For God's sake," Mark exploded, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. "That's it. I've had enough." Jessica rushed back in, her perfectly made-up face a mask of fury. "What happened? Your mother dropped her pills everywhere. I don't have time for this." I tried to apologize, my voice a broken whisper, trying to reach for the fallen medication, but the pain was a white-hot scream in my leg. "Stop," Jessica snapped, her voice like a whip. "You'll tear your stitches and then what? We'll be stuck with you for even longer." Tears welled in my eyes, hot and shameful. And then the dam of their resentment building for years finally broke. "Do you know what we've given up this week?" Jessica's voice rose, shrill and ugly. "I've had to reschedule 3 surgeries. Mark's missed 2 important meetings with the board." "We're not your servants, Carol," Mark added, using my first name for the first time ever. It felt like a slap across the face. Then came the words, screamed in unison, their faces twisted with a rage that shattered the last piece of my heart. "We're not your nurses." In that moment, staring at their contorted faces, something inside me didn't just break. It ignited. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. This story is going to be a roller coaster. And I'm so glad you're here for the ride. Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments, and let me know what time it is where you are. It's amazing to see how far these stories can reach. They left for their dinner, the heavy oak door slamming shut with a finality that echoed through the silent, cavernous house. The sound vibrated in my bones. I was alone, surrounded by the opulent evidence of their success, a success I had meticulously sacrificially funded. The sharp, throbbing pain in my knee was a dull ache now compared to the gaping wound in my soul. I lay there, staring at the ornate plasterwork on the ceiling, and my late husband Thomas's words came back to me, as clear and gentle as if he were sitting in the armchair by the window. "Carol," he used to say, his hand covering mine, "you can't buy love or respect. You can give it freely, but you can't purchase it. Not even from your own family." How right he was. I had spent a lifetime trying to prove him wrong. My mind, now a cold, clear chamber of memory, began to tally the receipts. The endless checks I'd written disguised as gifts. The down payment for this very house. A sum that had taken me a decade of double shifts to save. The six-figure tuition for Jessica's prestigious medical school, paid in full so she could graduate without the burden of debt I had carried. The emergency funds I transferred every few months without question. Funds that I later saw displayed in their vacation photos from Italy, or in the new designer handbag slung over Jessica's arm. My generosity hadn't been a gift. It had been consumed, taken as an entitlement. And my sudden temporary need for help wasn't seen as a chance for them to repay that love, but as an unforgivable, inconvenient breach of our unspoken contract. I give, they take. I remembered then with a chilling, sickening clarity, something from last week that I had dismissed at the time. Jessica had moved my emergency alert button, the one the hospital insisted I wear, from my nightstand to a high shelf on the bookshelf across the room. When I'd asked her why, she'd waved a dismissive, manicured hand. "Oh, it just ruins the aesthetic of the room, Mom. So clinical. It clashes with the decor." At the time, exhausted and in a fog of pain, I'd accepted it. It seemed like a silly, vain thing to say, but harmless. Now I saw it for what it was. A subtle, cruel act of control. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was about silencing me. She didn't want me to be safe. She wanted me to be quiet. She didn't want me to be a mother needing care. She wanted me to be an invisible, uncomplaining benefactor. The tears that had been threatening to fall simply dried up, evaporated by the cold fire now burning in my gut. The shaking in my hands stopped. A hard, unyielding resolve settled in my chest, solid as a block of ice. They saw me as a burden, a problem to be managed and hidden away when inconvenient. They had forgotten that this burden had built their entire world, brick by expensive brick. They had forgotten that I wasn't just a frail 68-year-old woman. I was the architect of their lives, the one who held all the blueprints, the one who owned the land. They had made a critical, fatal error in judgment. They assumed that because I was physically weak, I was mentally broken. They were about to learn how devastatingly wrong they were. My mind, free from the fog of pain and misplaced love, was sharper and more focused than it had been in years. I saw the path forward with perfect, terrifying clarity. I reached for my phone, my hands shaking not from weakness, but from a righteous seismic rage. They wanted a burden off their hands? I was about to become the ghost that would haunt their entire future. My first call was to the bank. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb surprisingly steady, and found the private number for Robert Peterson, the kind, meticulous man at the bank who had managed my finances for over 20 years. He had helped me set up Jessica's college fund, advised me on my retirement portfolio, and always treated me with a gentle, old-fashioned respect. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm with its usual Friday evening cheerfulness. "Carol, I was just thinking about you. How's the recovery coming along?" The simple kindness in his voice almost broke me, but I held firm. Now was not the time for emotion. Now was the time for action. "Robert, thank you for asking, but I'm afraid this isn't a social call," I said, my voice low and steady. "I have an emergency that requires your immediate attention." The warmth in his voice instantly shifted to professional concern. "Of course, Carol. Whatever you need. Is everything all right?" "No, it is not," I said, my tone leaving no room for pleasantries or doubt. "I need to make some immediate and non-negotiable changes to my accounts. As of this moment, I want all joint accounts held with my daughter, Jessica Winters, and her husband, Mark Winters, to be frozen. Immediately." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of a television in the background of his home. "Frozen?" he finally asked, the word sounding foreign. "Carol, this is highly unusual. Legally, I can do it with your authorization, but are you absolutely certain? This could have significant repercussions. I have never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied, the words tasting like steel in my mouth. Furthermore, I want you to terminate their access to any of my personal savings and investment accounts. Revoke any and all permissions they have. I want a digital wall built around my assets, and I want them on the outside of it. Effective immediately. I understand, he said, the sound of keyboard clicking now audible. I'll need to take you through a series of security questions to confirm your identity for a transaction of this magnitude. We went through the process: my mother's maiden name, my first pet, the street I grew up on. Each answer felt like another brick in the wall I was building. And one more thing, Robert, I said once the verifications were complete. Please prepare a full accounting of all withdrawals they have made from the joint accounts over the past 5 years. I want a detailed report. Every check, every transfer, every ATM withdrawal. I paused, the image of their designer clothes and luxury cars flashing in my mind. And cancel any and all automatic transfers scheduled to their names. He promised to handle everything personally, assuring me it would be his first priority. It will all be processed before the banks open tomorrow morning, Carol. They won't be able to access a single cent. Thank you, Robert, I said, a sliver of relief cutting through the anger. There's just one last thing. The mortgage payment for 247 Aspen Lane, the house in Denver. Has it been processed this month? I already knew the answer. I could feel it in my bones, a cold dread that settled deep. There was an uncomfortable pause, the sound of more typing. No, Carol, he said, his voice now laced with professional regret. I'm afraid that's the 3rd consecutive month it's been late. We were preparing to send a formal delinquency notice to all registered owners, including you. 3 months. I closed my eyes, the room spinning slightly. They weren't just treating me like a burden. They were actively, recklessly risking the very home I had helped them buy. A home that, for insurance and liability purposes, still had my name on the deed as a co-owner. Not only were they ungrateful, they were irresponsible. The ice in my chest hardened into diamond. This wasn't just an emotional betrayal anymore. This was a financial attack. The bank manager confirmed everything would be done by morning. But as I hung up, a cold realization washed over me. This wasn't just about negligence. This was something far more sinister. And my next call would have to be to my lawyer. What would you do in this situation? After being treated so horribly, would you have made that call to the bank? Let me know in the comments what your first move would have been. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. My second call was to David Miller, my lawyer for the past 30 years. He was more than just a lawyer, he was a friend. He'd handled my late husband's estate with a gentle competence that I had always been grateful for, and had always been a rock of calm, measured advice in a world that often felt chaotic. His familiar, gravelly voice answered on the second ring, sounding surprised to hear from me so late on a Friday. Carol? It's late. Is everything okay? How's the knee? The knee is the least of my problems, David, I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by the fresh confirmation of their financial irresponsibility. I took a deep breath and laid out the entire sordid situation. The surgery, the calculated neglect, the cruel, dismissive words that felt like physical blows, and the final damning discovery about the 3 missed mortgage payments. I told him everything, my words tumbling out in a controlled rush of righteous anger, not as a grieving mother, but as a client detailing a catastrophic breach of trust. When I finished, there was a long, thoughtful pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp, legal mind, categorizing the offenses, weighing the options. Carol, this is deeply troubling, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. The emotional cruelty is one thing, but the financial negligence is another matter entirely. It's actionable. However, an eviction is an extreme scorched earth measure. Are you absolutely sure you don't want to start with a formal letter? A stern warning? Perhaps we can arrange a mediation to discuss a repayment plan and establish some ground rules for your care. The old me, the peacemaker, the mother who always made excuses for her child's behavior, might have agreed. That woman would have clutched at the word mediation, like a lifeline, desperate to avoid conflict, desperate to believe that a simple conversation could fix a problem that was rotten to its core. But that woman was gone. She had crawled her last inch across a cold, unforgiving floor. "David," I said, my voice low and firm, each word carefully chosen. "They left me, their mother who just had major surgery that they encouraged me to have, crawling on the floor in pain while they laughed downstairs. They stood over me and screamed in my face that they weren't my nurses. This is not a misunderstanding that can be solved with a polite letter. This is a 5-alarm fire, and I am done trying to put it out with a teacup of water." I let that sink in, the silence stretching between us. They have been living in a home that I paid the down payment on, a home that still has my name on the deed as a co-owner, and they have not made a payment in 3 months. They are not just being cruel, David, they are being fraudulent. They are putting my financial health, my credit, my entire future at risk. I need them out. Not next month. Not next week. Now. He was silent for another moment. When he spoke again, the cautious, friendly tone was gone, replaced by the sharp, focused voice of the formidable lawyer I had relied on for decades. "You're right," he said, his voice clipped and decisive. "This goes beyond a family dispute. This is a matter of asset protection. I'll draft the formal eviction papers first thing in the morning. 48 hours to vacate the premises. It's aggressive, but under these circumstances, it's not only justified, it's necessary." "Thank you, David," I said, a wave of profound relief washing over me, so strong it almost made me dizzy. "Deliver them tomorrow morning. I want them to receive the notice before they even realize the bank accounts are empty. I want them to understand that the ground has shifted beneath their feet." "Consider it done," he replied. "And Carol? Be prepared. This is going to get ugly. People like them don't go quietly." I knew he was right. This wasn't just about kicking them out of a house. This was a declaration of war. A war for my dignity, my finances, and my future. I was severing the ties that had bound me for a lifetime, and I knew they wouldn't let go without a bloody fight. The legal wheels were in motion. I felt a strange sense of calm, the calm of a general who has finally committed to a battle plan. But what I didn't know was that Jessica and Mark had another weapon in their arsenal, one they had already deployed, designed to publicly humiliate me and discredit me before the legal papers even arrived. With the 2 most important calls made, a strange, profound quiet descended in the room. The adrenaline that had been coursing through me began to fade, leaving behind a hollow, vibrating ache. I couldn't stay here. Not another night in this house that now felt like a beautifully decorated tomb. My body screamed for rest, but my spirit screamed for escape. I scrolled through my phone and found the number for my dearest friend, Sandra. We'd been head nurses together at Denver General for 30 years, a lifetime of shared crises, laughter, and mutual respect. She knew me better than anyone, even my own daughter. My finger trembled as I pressed the call button. "Sandra, it's Carol," I said, my voice finally cracking. "I need help." I didn't have to say another word. I heard the sound of keys jingling on her end. "I'm on my way," she said, her voice a balm to my frayed, shattered nerves. "Don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, a morbid, self-destructive curiosity got the better of me. I needed a distraction, anything to keep my mind from replaying that horrific scene. I opened my phone, my thumb hovering over the blue and white Facebook app. I just wanted to see something normal, a picture of a friend's grandchild, a silly cat video, a recipe for lemon cake. Instead, the first thing that loaded onto my feed was a new post from Jessica. It had been posted just an hour ago, likely from the passenger seat of their luxury car, as they drove to their fancy dinner. It was a professionally lit selfie of her and Mark, smiling radiantly, clinking champagne glasses. They looked happy, successful, the perfect power couple. But it was the caption beneath the photo that made the air leave my lungs in a painful rush. "It's so challenging to balance a demanding career with caring for an elderly parent who doesn't always appreciate the sacrifices you make," she wrote to her 2,000 friends and followers. "You pour out your love, your time, your resources, but sometimes, it's just never enough. Sending strength and love to all the other caregivers out there doing their best in a thankless job. #caregiver life, #family first, #eldercare." My breath hitched in my throat. The sheer, breathtaking hypocrisy was staggering. But it was the comments section that truly twisted the knife in my heart. Dozens of them, a cascade of sympathy and praise from her colleagues, from distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. "You're a saint, Jessica," one wrote. So sorry you're going through that. Your mother is so lucky to have you. Stay strong. You're an inspiration. And then I saw it. A comment that felt like a physical blow. It was from Linda, my next-door neighbor for 15 years, a woman with whom I'd shared countless cups of coffee over the back fence, a woman who had borrowed my lawnmower just last month. Thinking of you, sweetie, Linda wrote, her comment punctuated with a sad face emoji. I can only imagine. I saw the ambulance when she arrived last week. Carol must be quite a handful these days. A handful. My private pain, my utter vulnerability, had been twisted, packaged, and served up for public consumption and judgment. And my own neighbor, my friend, was lapping it up. She had turned me into the villain of my own story without hearing a single word from me. It was a calculated, vicious public shaming. A preemptive strike designed to paint herself as the long-suffering martyred daughter before the truth of her greed and cruelty could ever come to light. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I thought I might be sick. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. She had taken it public. She was trying to ruin my reputation, to poison the well of sympathy in our community before I could even speak a word in my own defense. You know that feeling? When a betrayal is so public, so calculated, that it takes your breath away and makes the world tilt on its axis. That's what I felt. And just as I was reeling from that digital stab in the back, my doorbell rang. It was my salvation. Sandra stood on the doorstep, her warm, familiar face a beacon of sanity in the swirling chaos of my life. She took one look at my tear-streaked face, my trembling hands clutching my phone, and the scattered pills still littering the floor like fallen soldiers, and her expression hardened into a mask of protective fury. "Oh, Carol," she said, her voice low and dangerous. She didn't need an explanation. She brushed past the doorway, her presence filling the cold, sterile room with a warmth and strength I desperately needed. She helped me up from the bed, her touch gentle but firm, the way only a seasoned nurse's can be. It was a touch that communicated competence, care, and a no-nonsense attitude that I found incredibly comforting. "Let's get you out of here," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Right now. You're not spending another minute in this house." As she efficiently packed a small overnight bag with my medications, my toothbrush, and a few changes of clothes, I told her everything. The words poured out of me in a torrent of pain and disbelief. The crawling, the screaming, the chilling Facebook posts, the calls to the bank and the lawyer. I expected shock, maybe even a little disbelief that Jessica could be capable of such cruelty. Instead, she just nodded, her lips pressed into a thin, grim line, a look of dark satisfaction in her eyes. "It's about damn time, Carol," she said, zipping up my bag with a decisive tug. "I've watched you let that girl walk all over you for years. I've seen the way she takes and takes. And you just keep giving, hoping one day she'll magically turn into the daughter you wish she was. Why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked, my voice small and fragile, the question of a child. She paused in her packing, turning to look me straight in the eye, her gaze unflinching. "Would you have listened? Or would you have defended her? You've always been so determined to see the best in Jessica, Carol, even when there wasn't much good to see. It wasn't my place to shatter your hope." Her words stung with the sharp, clean pain of truth. I had been willfully blind, desperate to maintain the illusion of a happy, loving family, an illusion I had paid for in every sense of the word. Sandra carefully helped me down the grand, curving staircase, my arm draped over her sturdy shoulders. Each step was a small victory, a step away from the woman I had been. As we walked out the front door of the house my money had bought, the house that no longer felt like a home, I didn't look back. Settled in the passenger seat of her comfortable, familiar car, I watched the grand facade of the house shrink in the side mirror until it was swallowed by the darkness. At Sandra's cozy, welcoming apartment, she settled me in her guest room. It was smaller than the one at Jessica's, but it was filled with books and handmade quilts. It was warm and it was safe. And the emergency alert button was right on the nightstand where it belonged. As she helped me into bed, the dam finally broke. I cried. Not the silent, stifled tears of a burden trying to be quiet, but the deep, wrenching sobs of a woman mourning the death of a 40-year relationship, the death of the daughter she thought she knew. Sandra sat beside me, her hand a steady, comforting weight on my shoulder, letting me get it all out, absorbing my grief into her own unwavering strength. Just before I drifted off into an exhausted sleep, my phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. Dinner running late. Don't wait up. I stared at the message, a bitter, broken laugh escaping my lips. Oh, I wasn't waiting up. In fact, I wasn't waiting for anything from them anymore. I turned off my phone. I fell asleep in a safe bed for the first time in a week, but I knew the storm was only just beginning. The next morning, all hell would break loose. I woke to the insistent, jarring ringing of my phone. For a disoriented moment, I thought I was back at Jessica's house, that the nightmare was starting all over again. Then I saw the floral wallpaper of Sandra's guest room, and the tray she had left on the nightstand with a glass of water. The digital clock on the nightstand read 9:17 a.m. I had slept for nearly 12 hours. I fumbled for my phone, my screen lit up with a staggering, almost comical number of notifications. 23 missed calls and 35 text messages, all from Jessica and Mark. I scrolled through them, a morbid play-by-play of their dawning horror. The messages grew more frantic, more demanding with each one. Mom, where are you? This isn't funny, pick up the phone. Your walker is still here, but you're gone. We're about to call the police. Answer your phone. The latest one, received just minutes ago, was different. The tone had shifted from feigned concern to pure, unadulterated panic. There's some man here with legal papers. He says he's from a lawyer's office. What's going on? What did you do? So David had been prompt. I could picture the scene perfectly. Jessica, in her expensive silk robe and eye mask, her face a mask of shock and disbelief as she was served with an eviction notice from her own multi-million-dollar home. Mark would be pacing the marble entryway, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair. His mind not on my well-being, but on calculating the immediate and catastrophic financial fallout. Sandra came into the room with a fresh tray holding a cup of steaming tea and some toast. Let me guess, she said, nodding at my buzzing phone. The ungratefuls have discovered the consequences of their actions. My phone rang again, vibrating violently against the nightstand. Jessica's face, contorted in a silent scream, appeared on the screen. You should answer, Sandra said, her voice firm as she sat on the edge of the bed. But put it on speaker. I want to hear this. I took a deep, steadying breath, the warm mug of tea in my hands grounding me. I pressed the green button. Hello, Jessica. Where are you? Her voice was a shrill, panicked shriek that made me pull the phone away from my ear. There's a lawyer here. A process server. Saying we have to leave our house in 48 hours. And the bank just called Mark, the fraud department. They said our joint accounts are frozen. Our credit cards are being declined. What is happening? I think you know exactly what's happening, I replied, my voice calmer than I had felt in years. It was the calm of absolute certainty. I've simply taken your words to heart. You're not my nurses, and as of last night, I am no longer your ATM. There was a stunned, sputtering silence on the other end. Then, is this because of what we said yesterday? We were stressed, Mom. You were being difficult. You can't possibly be serious. I can and I have. I cut her off, the firmness in my own voice surprising me. The house payments you've been forgetting to make for the past 3 months? That stops now. The emergency funds you've been using for spa weekends in Aspen and renovations on a house you weren't even paying for? That stops too. How did you? We were going to catch up on those payments. We had a plan. Mark's voice now defensive and loud, a bully caught in a lie. They had me on speaker too. This is completely unreasonable. You're being vindictive. Is it? I asked, my voice dripping with ice. Tell me, Mark, was it reasonable to leave your 68-year-old mother-in-law, who just had a knee replacement, crawling on the floor in agony? Was it reasonable to resent caring for me for one single week when I paid for your wife's entire medical education, a debt that would have taken you decades to pay off? Silence. A thick, damning silence. Then Jessica's voice, suddenly soft, syrupy, and calculating. The voice of a manipulator. Mom, you're upset, and you have every right to be. We were wrong. We've been under a lot of pressure at work. Come home and we'll talk about this like adults. I am home, I replied. Just not at your house. Where are you? The panic was back, raw and real. With someone who actually cares about my well-being. The eviction stands, Jessica. You have until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. You can't do this. Where are we supposed to go? All our money is in those accounts. You're both highly paid, respected medical professionals, I said, echoing her own words back to her. Figure it out. Mark ended the call with a guttural threat. This isn't over. You'll regret this. I hung up, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought I knew what he meant, that they would fight the eviction. But their next move was more depraved, more evil than I could have ever imagined. Thank you so much for sticking with my story. It means the world to me. If you're still here listening, do me a favor and comment with the number 1. So I know you're on this journey with me. Your support gives me strength. The quiet that followed that explosive phone call was heavy with unspoken possibilities. Sandra squeezed my hand. I'm so incredibly proud of you, Carol. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, but it was necessary. I felt drained, yet strangely lighter, as if a tumor of resentment I'd been carrying for years had finally been excised. But Mark's final, snarled threat lingered in the air like a toxic vapor. I knew this was far from over. They were cornered animals now, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. The confirmation of their next line of attack came that afternoon, with a somber call from my lawyer, David. Carol, I just received a call from an attorney named Alan Croft. He's representing Jessica and Mark. As expected, they're not going down without a fight. What are they planning? I asked, my stomach tightening into a cold, hard knot. Are they contesting the eviction? Oh, they're contesting it, he explained, his voice grim. But their strategy is far more insidious than a simple landlord-tenant dispute. They are building a case to argue that you are mentally incompetent. I gasped, the air rushing out of my lungs. What? On what grounds? They're claiming that your judgment is severely impaired due to a combination of post-operative stress, the powerful pain medication you're on, and what they are calling age-related cognitive decline. They're arguing that you are not of sound mind to be making major financial and legal decisions, and that you are being unduly influenced. Influenced by whom? I asked, bewildered. By Sandra, presumably, he said with a sigh. They're going to try and paint her as a manipulative opportunist who is taking advantage of your vulnerable state. I was speechless. It was one thing to be cruel and ungrateful, but this was a calculated, evil attempt to strip me of my very identity, to erase my autonomy, to paint me as a confused, senile old woman who didn't know what she was doing. It was the ultimate betrayal. A weapon designed to destroy my credibility and seize control of my life. They've already contacted your surgeon, Dr. Harrison, to request your medical records and a statement on your post-operative mental state, citing their deep concern for your well-being, David continued. They won't get them, I said, a spark of hot, defiant anger cutting through the shock. Doctor-patient confidentiality still applies, even if your daughter is a surgeon. Correct, David said. Dr. Harrison's office has already refused, citing HIPAA. But this is the narrative they're building for the courts. That you're a danger to yourself and that their actions, however drastic, are for your own good. Just as David was explaining their despicable strategy, my other line beeped. It was a number I recognized from the hospital. David, can you hold on for one moment? This is important. I switched lines. It was Caroline, my former nursing colleague who now worked as an administrator at the Golden Pines Rehabilitation Facility, the best in Denver. Carol, I'm so sorry to bother you at home, she said, her voice hushed and urgent. But your daughter, Dr. Winters, was just here. My blood ran cold. Here? At the rehab center. Yes, Caroline confirmed. She didn't come to the main reception. She came directly to my office. She was asking a lot of very specific questions about our secured memory care unit. She kept emphasizing how confused and paranoid you've been since the surgery, and said she was exploring options for your long-term supervised care. Carol, something felt very, very wrong. It made no sense for a knee replacement patient. It felt like she was shopping for a prison. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying, sickening clarity. They weren't just trying to get the money back. They weren't just trying to keep the house. They were trying to erase me, to have me declared incompetent, lock me away in a facility against my will, and gain complete legal guardianship over me and my assets. And their evil plan was already in motion. That evening, they showed up at Sandra's front door. The doorbell rang sharply, insistently around 7 p.m. It wasn't a friendly ring, it was a summons. Sandra, who had been fluffing the pillows on the couch, froze. She walked to the door and peered through the peephole, her body instantly stiffening. She stepped back, her face a pale mask of disbelief and fury. "It's Jessica," she whispered, her voice tight. "And she's not alone. There's a man in a uniform with her. Looks like a paramedic." My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. They were trying to force the issue. They were creating a medical emergency where none existed. Sandra took a deep breath, her nursing instincts kicking in. She was calm, controlled, and ready for a fight. She cracked the door, keeping the heavy brass security chain engaged. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice deceptively sweet and neighborly. "I'm here to see my mother, Carol Simmons." Jessica's voice was tight with barely controlled rage. She was clearly not expecting Sandra to be the one to answer. "I know she's in there." "I'm sorry, but Carol isn't receiving visitors right now," Sandra replied calmly, blocking the opening with her body. "This isn't a social call," Jessica snapped, her voice rising, losing its professional veneer. "We have serious concerns about her mental state and her physical safety. She's a danger to herself. We've brought medical transport to take her to a facility where she can be properly evaluated and receive the care she needs." The paramedic standing behind her, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable, shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Ma'am," he said, addressing Sandra but looking at the floor. "We received a 911 call about an elderly post-surgical patient experiencing acute confusion and paranoia, possibly requiring an involuntary psychiatric hold for her own safety. That elderly patient is a retired head nurse with 40 years of distinguished service at Denver General. She is a respected medical professional who is perfectly competent." Sandra shot back, her voice like ice. "And I can assure you she is neither confused nor paranoid. That's for doctors to determine, not you," Jessica insisted, trying to push the door open against the chain. "Sandra, you are interfering with necessary medical care. You are obstructing emergency personnel. That could be construed as elder abuse." I'd heard enough. The audacity, the sheer, twisted gall of her, accusing my best friend of the very thing she herself was guilty of, was more than I could bear. Using my walker, I made my way slowly but steadily from the living room to the doorway. Each step was painful, but each step was also a declaration of my own strength. "Open it, Sandra," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through the tension. Sandra looked at me, her eyes filled with concern, but she saw the resolve in my face. She unlatched the chain and swung the door wide open. Jessica's eyes widened when she saw me standing there, not cowering in a bed, but standing tall, dressed in clean clothes, my hair combed, my gaze clear and direct. "Mom," she faltered, the righteous anger draining from her face, replaced by a flicker of shock. "We've been so worried." "No, you haven't," I interrupted, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "You've been worried about your finances. You've been worried about your reputation. You have not, for one single second, been worried about me." I turned my attention to the young paramedic. "Sir, I sincerely apologize that you were brought here tonight under completely false pretenses. As you can see, I am alert and oriented times 4. I had a total knee replacement 1 week ago, but my mind is perfectly clear. She's on heavy pain medication. Narcotics," Jessica insisted desperately, grabbing for a lifeline. "She's not making rational decisions. I reduced my pain medication 2 days ago, a fact you would know if you had bothered to ask," I countered calmly. "And I have been making perfectly rational decisions my entire life, including the recent and very rational decision to stop enabling ungrateful and manipulative family members." Just as the paramedic, now looking mortified, reached for his radio to call his supervisor and report a false alarm, a new voice cut through the tense standoff. "That won't be necessary." It was David. He stood at the end of the hallway, an imposing, welcome figure in a dark suit, a leather briefcase in his hand. He must have come straight from his office. "I'm Mrs. Simmons's attorney," he announced, his voice booming in the narrow hall. "And I have paperwork here from an independent, board-certified psychiatrist who assessed my client's competency just this morning. She is, in the legal and medical sense, of perfectly sound mind." Jessica's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious crimson. The game was up. Seeing the mask of concern completely drop from my daughter's face to be replaced by pure, ugly greed. It was both horrifying and validating. They were escorted away by a very apologetic paramedic, But the fight was far from over. In fact, they were about to stoop to criminality. The aftermath of the paramedic showdown left me shaken but strangely resolute. The lines had been drawn not in sand but in concrete. Jessica's desperation was escalating, becoming more dangerous and unpredictable with each failed attempt to regain control. The next blow, the one that proved there were no depths to which they would not sink, came the following afternoon. It was another call from Robert Peterson at the bank. His voice, usually so calm and professional, was strained with a gravity I had never heard from him before. "Carol, I feel I must inform you of a serious incident that occurred today. Your son-in-law, Mark, came to the bank's main branch. He was quite agitated." My stomach clenched into a cold, hard knot. "What did he do, Robert?" "He was demanding access to your accounts," Mr. Peterson explained, his voice tight with disapproval. "He claimed you were medically incapacitated following your surgery, and that he was your designated financial proxy. He was carrying what appeared to be official power of attorney documents, notarized and with your signature on them, authorizing his complete control over all your assets." Forgery. The word exploded in my mind. My own daughter and her husband had conspired to forge my signature, to create a legal document designed to steal my entire life savings. The betrayal was so profound, so fundamentally evil, it left me breathless. I did no such thing," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. "We're well aware," he assured me, his voice softening with sympathy. "The signatures were a poor, almost amateurish imitation of the ones we have on file for you, and the notary stamp was from a public notary who, upon a quick verification call, confirmed he had retired and moved to Florida 2 years ago. Our security team escorted Mr. Winters from the premises after he became belligerent and started causing a scene. But I thought you should know the criminal lengths they are willing to go to." After I hung up, I sat in stunned silence, the phone feeling heavy as a stone in my hand. David's voice on the phone later was firm, stripped of all pleasantries. "Carol, this is a felony. This is no longer a family dispute. It's a criminal conspiracy. It's time we discuss a restraining order and filing a police report." Felt so extreme, so final, like a bridge being blown up. But what was more extreme? A piece of paper from a judge, or attempting to have your mother committed under false pretenses and then forging her signature on legal documents? Deep down I knew he was right. That night, as I was trying to process the sheer criminality of their actions, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was my grandson, Kevin, calling from his dorm room in California. His voice was young and confused, a stark, painful contrast to the ugliness that had consumed my life. "Grandma? What's going on? Mom and Dad are saying you've lost your mind and kicked them out of their house for no reason." I explained the situation as gently as I could, omitting the ugliest details, not wanting to poison him against his own parents. He listened quietly, and then he said something that gave me the first heartbreaking glimpse into the deep, dark well of my daughter's lifelong resentment. "Mom says you always used money to control her," he said, his voice hesitant and small. "She told me once that when she was a little girl, you'd hang all your nursing awards and certificates on the living room wall, but you kept the paintings she made for you in a box in the attic." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I remembered that box. It was a beautiful cedar chest. I had kept her childhood artwork in it because I thought it was precious, too special and fragile for the wall. I wanted to protect it forever. But she had seen it as a rejection. She had seen my pride in my career not as an inspiration for her, but as a shadow she could never escape. She saw my success as her failure. This revelation from Kevin didn't excuse Jessica's criminal behavior, but it added a painful, tragic new layer to the story. It made my next decision, the one about my will and my entire legacy, both harder and more profoundly necessary than ever before. Kevin's words echoed in my mind for days, a haunting refrain. The story of the paintings, it didn't change what Jessica and Mark had done, but it colored it with a shade of tragedy I hadn't been able to see before. It showed me a deep, painful wound that had been festering in my daughter for decades, long before the arguments about money and houses began. It was a wound I had unintentionally inflicted, a wound I had been completely blind to. But understanding the source of her pain, however heartbreaking, couldn't erase the very real danger she and her husband now posed to me. This painful realization solidified my resolve. I could mourn the mother-daughter relationship I thought I had, while simultaneously protecting myself from the daughter I actually had. The two were not mutually exclusive. The next morning, David arrived at Sandra's apartment with a notary and a thick stack of documents that represented the rest of my life. Spreading them across Sandra's warm wooden dining table felt like laying out the blueprints for a new, uncertain future. "We'll start with the revocation of power of attorney," David said, his voice gentle as he slid the first document toward me. "This officially and irrevocably nullifies any previous authorization Jessica had to act on your behalf, financially, medically, or otherwise. It creates a public record of your decision." I picked up the pen, the weight of it feeling immense in my hand. My hand was surprisingly steady. I signed my name, the ink a dark, definitive line severing a legal tie that had once been the ultimate symbol of motherly trust. Next came the healthcare proxy, the document that named the person who would make life or death decisions for me if I became incapacitated. For over 20 years, that name had been Jessica's. The thought that she could have held that power over me now sent a chill down my spine. "Have you decided who you'd like to name in her place?" David asked softly. I looked across the table at Sandra, my friend, my rock, the woman who had swooped in without question, who had held my hand while I cried, who had stood like a lioness between me and my own daughter at her front door. "Sandra," I asked, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name, "would you be willing?" Her eyes widened in surprise, and then softened with a deep, unwavering affection. "Of course, Carol. It would be an honor." As I signed that document, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. The terrifying fear that a future health crisis could put me under Jessica's vengeful control vanished, replaced by a profound sense of security. The final document was the most difficult, my revised will. "You don't have to decide everything today," David reminded me. "We can simply remove them as beneficiaries for now." I stared at the blank spaces where the names of my heirs should go. Who was my family now? An idea born from a lifetime of service and a newfound clarity began to form. "Denver General has a nursing scholarship program," I said slowly, the idea taking shape as I spoke. "For talented, hardworking nursing aides who can't afford to advance their education. I want to establish an endowment. The Carol Simmons Nursing Scholarship." David smiled for the first time that morning. "A wonderful legacy, Carol. And Kevin," I added, my voice softening. "My grandson shouldn't suffer for his parents' terrible mistakes. I want to establish a trust for his education, and to help him start his life. But it must be ironclad. Jessica and Mark cannot touch a single penny of it." "Very wise," David agreed. As we worked through the details, I was dismantling the future I had always imagined brick by brick, and building a new one in its place. A future based on values, not obligation. A legacy of compassion, not just blood. I was dismantling the future I had always imagined, and building a new one based on values, not obligation. I felt at peace. But that peace was shattered when Mark showed up at Sandra's door that night, desperate and begging. "Thank you so much for sticking with my story. It means the world to me. If you're still here listening, do me a favor and comment with the number 1. So I know you're on this journey with me. Your support gives me strength." The doorbell rang just after dinner, a sharp, frantic sound that was completely out of place in the calm sanctuary of Sandra's home. We both froze, looking at each other. Sandra went to the door, her movements cautious, and peered through the peephole. I saw her posture stiffen, her shoulders square as if bracing for a fight. She came back into the living room, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. "It's Mark," she whispered, her voice laced with disgust. "He's alone." My first instinct was to hide, to retreat to the guest room and tell her I wasn't here. The thought of facing him, of seeing that duplicitous face again, made my stomach churn. But then a wave of cold anger washed over me. I was done hiding. This was my life, my fight. I would not be a coward in my own story. "I'll handle it," I said, my voice surprisingly firm as I pushed myself up with my walker. I made my way to the door, my heart a steady, determined drum against my ribs. Sandra opened it just enough for me to see him, keeping the heavy brass security chain securely engaged. The man standing in the dimly lit hallway was a pathetic shadow of the arrogant, preening executive who had screamed at me just a few days ago. His expensive suit was rumpled and stained, his usually perfect hair was a mess, and there were dark, desperate circles under his eyes. He looked defeated and scared. "Carol," he began, his voice stripped of its usual condescending boom. It was thin, reedy. "Please. We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the steel in my new knee. "This is between family," he insisted, his eyes darting past me, pleading. "Sandra has no right to interfere in this. Sandra has every right to decide who enters her home," I countered, my voice unwavering. "And I have made it clear that I don't wish to speak with you or Jessica." His carefully constructed composure began to crack. "Just tell her we're staying at the Marriott downtown." His voice dropped, laced with a humiliation and desperation I'd never heard from him before. "Our credit cards are being declined. All of them. The hotel is threatening to kick us out. We can't access any of our accounts. Does she understand what she's doing to us? To her own daughter." The sheer, unadulterated entitlement of the question even now was breathtaking. He wasn't sorry for what they did. He was sorry for the consequences. He wasn't worried about my well-being. He was worried about his credit score and his hotel bill. "I believe she understands perfectly," Sandra replied coldly from beside me, her voice dripping with contempt. "Jessica's a mess," he continued, trying a different, more manipulative tactic. "She's not sleeping, she's not eating. She's falling apart. Is that what she wanted? To completely destroy her own daughter?" The assumption that my actions were designed to hurt, rather than to protect myself from further harm, was the final straw. Before Sandra could respond, I spoke, my voice ringing with a clarity and power that surprised even me. "What I wanted, Mark, was a little help getting to the bathroom. What I wanted was a little kindness and compassion after major surgery. What I got was cruelty, neglect, and a public shaming." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "So this is punishment?" he asked, his voice cracking. "This is reality," I corrected him calmly. "The reality that two adults with medical degrees and six-figure salaries should be able to support themselves without draining their elderly mother's life savings." "You've always been so generous before," he argued, a whine creeping into his voice. "How were we supposed to know you'd suddenly change the rules?" And there it was. The absolute truth. They saw my love not as a gift, but as a set of rules they could exploit. With perfect final clarity, I looked him straight in the eye. "Perhaps when you told me you weren't my nurses, you should have remembered that I was never your banker." I closed the door then, the decisive click of the lock echoing in the hallway. Closing the door on him felt like closing a chapter of my life. I knew I had to move forward, and my next step was to focus on my own healing, away from all this toxicity. Or so I thought. 2 weeks passed in a blur of diligent physical therapy and quiet, soul-mending healing at Sandra's. My new knee was getting stronger every day, and with each determined step I took without my walker, I felt a piece of my old, confident self returning. I knew I couldn't impose on Sandra's generosity indefinitely, and we were beginning to discuss my options for transitioning back to my own apartment when an unexpected call came. It was Kevin. "Grandma, are you okay? I've been trying to reach you. Mom and Dad's numbers aren't working." His genuine youthful concern was a balm to my weary soul. "I'm doing much better, sweetheart. How are you holding up?" There was a significant pause on the other end of the line. "I'm in Boston," he said, his voice strained. "I'm at Logan Airport. Can I see you?" The request caught me completely off guard. "Boston? You're supposed to be in California for your midterm exams." "I took a week off," he explained, and I could hear the stress in his voice. "Things at home are intense. Mom and Dad are fighting constantly, screaming at each other. They had to move into this small, awful apartment, and Mom just keeps saying it's all your fault. But Dad's blaming her for mismanaging their finances and says she has a spending problem. I needed to get away from it all. My heart ached for him. He was just a 19-year-old kid, caught in the toxic crossfire of his parents' greed and spectacular immaturity. "Of course you can see me," I told him, my voice softening. "Come right over." When he arrived at Sandra's that afternoon, he looked older than he had at Christmas. The carefree light in his eyes had been dimmed by a new, heavy weariness. He hugged me carefully, mindful of my knee. We sat in the living room, a plate of Sandra's cookies between us, and he really looked at me for the first time. "You look good, Grandma," he said, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. Mom said you were having cognitive issues, that you were really confused. A small sad laugh escaped my lips. I assure you my mind is perfectly clear, Kevin. The only thing I'm suffering from is a severe case of belated clarity. He then asked the question I knew was coming, the question he had flown across the country to ask. What happened, Grandma? Seriously, why did you kick them out of their house? Everything seemed fine. I took a deep breath and told him everything. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I didn't vilify them either. I told him the facts. I told him about being left to crawl on the floor, about the cruel words they screamed at me. I told him about the missed mortgage payments, the years of financial dependency, the public shaming on Facebook. I explained that my generosity, which I had intended as love, had been treated as an obligation. He listened, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a dawning horror. They wouldn't help you to the bathroom, he whispered, his eyes wide. But Mom's a doctor. She takes an oath. Being a doctor doesn't automatically make someone a compassionate person, I replied sadly. Even to their own family. He was quiet for a long time, crumbling a cookie in his fingers, processing it all. Then his eyes dropped to the floor and he looked ashamed. They want me to convince you to unfreeze the accounts, he admitted, his voice barely audible. Mom said if I could just come here and talk some sense into you, remind you that we're family, everything could go back to normal. There it was, the real heartbreaking reason for his visit. Yet, looking at his troubled young face, I couldn't find it in my heart to be angry with him. He was a pawn in their desperate, selfish game. Is that why you came? I asked quietly. He hesitated, then met my gaze, his eyes shining with unshed tears. At first, yeah, that was the plan. But now I'm not so sure. They didn't tell me any of this. They just said you were being irrational and vindictive. And what do you think now that you've heard my side? I asked gently. He looked up, the conflict tearing him apart. I think I don't know what to think. But it doesn't make sense that you'd suddenly change and do all this unless something really, really serious happened. He left that day with a new, troubled understanding, but the rift in our family felt wider and more painful than ever. I wondered if it could ever be healed. A few weeks later, after I checked myself into the best rehab facility in the city, Jessica showed up, demanding answers and ready for war. I made the decision to move into Golden Pines Rehabilitation Center on my own terms, a choice that felt both ironic and empowering. This was the very type of facility Jessica had researched for me, not for my physical recovery, but for my supposed mental decline. But this was my choice, a proactive step towards rebuilding my physical independence, in a place where I felt respected and safe. The staff, many of whom were former colleagues and friends from my long career at Denver General, greeted me with genuine warmth and affection. It felt less like being a patient and more like a homecoming, albeit a strange one. My days quickly fell into a comfortable, purposeful rhythm of intensive physical therapy, quiet reading, and visits from Sandra. The work was hard, each painful bend of my new knee a testament to my determination, and with every small victory, I felt stronger, more in control of my own body and my own life. A week into my stay, my physical therapist, a kind young man named Marcus, mentioned during one of our sessions that my daughter had been calling the center relentlessly. She's been asking about your progress, your expected discharge date, whether you're receiving visitors, he said casually as he helped me navigate the parallel bars. She's very persistent. I wasn't surprised. That evening, her campaign of persistence escalated into a full-blown siege. Maria, the unit manager and a nurse I had once mentored, knocked on my door, her expression apologetic and tense. Carol, I'm so sorry to bother you, but your daughter is at the front desk. She's causing quite a scene. She's insisting on seeing you, claiming it's her legal right as your next of kin to assess your care situation. My heart began to race, a familiar drumbeat of anxiety. The old me, the woman who would do anything to avoid conflict, would have given in immediately. But I was no longer that woman. That woman had been left behind on a cold, hardwood floor. Please tell her that I'm not accepting visitors this evening, I said, my voice firm and clear. And you can remind her that as a medical professional, she should know better than to violate patient privacy and facility protocols. Maria looked visibly relieved. I will tell her exactly that. And I'll alert security, just in case she doesn't take no for an answer. Minutes after Maria left, my phone, which I had left on the nightstand, rang. It was Jessica. This time I answered. They won't let me see you, she said, her voice tight and vibrating with controlled fury. What have you told them about me? What lies have you been spreading? I have told them nothing but the truth, that I'm not accepting visitors this evening, I replied calmly. It's been a long, tiring day of physical therapy. I'm not just any visitor. I'm your daughter, your only child. The emphasis on the word only was a pointed, manipulative barb, a reminder of the unique power and position she believed she held in my life. Yes, you are, I acknowledged, refusing to take the bait. And when I am ready to see you, I will let you know. Ready? She scoffed, her voice dripping with derision. What does that even mean? We need to talk about what you've done. The accounts, the house, the will. You can't just cut me out of your life and hide in a nursing home over one bad day. It wasn't one bad day, Jessica, I said quietly, the exhaustion of it all washing over me. It was the culmination of years of imbalance in our relationship. And we will talk eventually. But it will be on my terms in my time. And not until I am stronger, both physically and emotionally. Her voice hardened. Fine. Stay in that place with all your little nurse friends fawning over you. Play the victim. But don't expect me to come crawling back when you finally realize how lonely life is without your real family. Is that what you think this is about? I asked, a wave of sadness passing through me. That I want you to crawl back? Isn't it? She spat. Isn't this whole dramatic production designed to make us grovel for your forgiveness? I sighed deeply. No, Jessica. This isn't about punishment or groveling. This is about me finally recognizing my own worth. It's about setting healthy boundaries, something I should have done decades ago. The line went dead. I hung up the phone, my hand shaking but my mind clear. For the first time in our adult relationship, I had denied my daughter access to me. I had set a boundary and I had held it. I was finally in control. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was the one driving. 6 weeks after my surgery, I walked out of the Golden Pines Rehabilitation Center, not with a walker, but with a simple cane in one hand and a profound, hard-won sense of my own resilience in the other. It was time to go home, to my own apartment, my own quiet space, my own life. The apartment had been my sanctuary for 30 years, and as Sandra helped me unpack, the familiar scent of old books and lemon polish felt like a comforting embrace. I was finally ready for the final confrontation, the conversation I had been both dreading and postponing. I needed to have it in my own territory on my own terms. Kevin was there to greet me. He'd flown back to Boston for the summer, a silent, supportive presence in the background of my recovery. But he brought news that stunned me into silence. Mom and Dad are getting divorced, he said quietly, his young face etched with a pain and weariness that no 19-year-old should have to carry. Dad moved out last week. They've been fighting constantly since everything with you happened. Dad says Mom's spending habits and financial mismanagement destroyed them. Mom says Dad only married her because he thought he was getting your money and your influence at the hospital eventually. The sheer, unadulterated ugliness of their accusations against each other pained me deeply, especially knowing that Kevin was caught in the toxic crossfire. The next afternoon, as arranged by Kevin, Jessica came. He, at my firm request, had made himself scarce, going to a movie to give us the space we needed. This was a conversation that needed to happen without an audience, without a referee. She stood in my living room, looking both familiar and like a complete stranger. She had lost weight, and the stress had carved new, hard lines around her mouth. The warmth she once had, or that I had imagined she had, was gone, replaced by a brittle, defensive shell. Tyler thinks we need to talk, she said, her voice carefully neutral, as if we were two colleagues discussing a difficult case. And what do you think? I asked, meeting her gaze directly. She sighed, a flicker of something, exhaustion maybe or defeat, crossing her face. I think our relationship is beyond repair. But I also think we need closure. What I wanted, Jessica, I said, my voice even and measured, was respect, consideration, basic human kindness from my only daughter during the most vulnerable time of my life. One bad day, Mom. She shot back, the old fire, the familiar defensiveness returning to her eyes. We had one bad day after years and years of taking care of you, of being at your beck and call, and you punished us like we were criminals. Taking care of me? I echoed, the incredulity sharp in my voice. Jessica, I have been financially supporting your entire lifestyle for your entire adult life. I paid for your education, your wedding, your house. And you never let us forget it, she interrupted, her cheeks flushing with a sudden hot anger. Every gift came with invisible strings attached. Every generous gesture was just another way for you to remind me that I couldn't succeed on my own, that I would always be in your debt. Her accusation struck me like a physical blow. It was so far from my own reality, from my own intentions, that I couldn't immediately process it. Is that really how you saw my help? As some sort of power play? As a weapon? What else was I supposed to think? She demanded, her voice cracking with the weight of decades of unspoken resentment. The great Nurse Simmons, beloved by all her colleagues, respected by every doctor, swooping in to rescue her struggling daughter at every turn. Do you have any idea what it was like growing up in your shadow? Hearing constantly about how perfect and admired you were while I was just an afterthought? The doctor's daughter who was never quite as good as her nurse mother. I stared at her, genuinely bewildered, as the pieces of a puzzle I never knew existed began to fall into place. My pride in her accomplishments had been perceived by her as crushing expectations she could never meet. My financial support, which I had intended as pure, unconditional love, had felt to her like an ongoing statement of her own inadequacy. I never ever meant to make you feel that way, I said quietly, the words feeling horribly inadequate. I was just trying to help, to show my love the only way I knew how. By buying it, she stated flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. And then when we couldn't repay that love in exactly the way you wanted, at the exact moment you demanded it, you took it all away. We sat in a heavy, suffocating silence, the chasm between our two realities, our two truths vast and unbridgeable. Congratulations, Mom, she said as she stood to leave, her voice dripping with a final bitter sarcasm. You won. This wasn't about winning. There were no winners here, only losers. She left and there was no sense of victory, only the heavy, crushing weight of truth. There was no going back. But as I sat there in the quiet of my own home, I had to wonder what comes next. What does a new beginning possibly look like at 68 years old? In the quiet, lonely aftermath of that final brutal conversation, something unexpected and miraculous happened. A new kind of peace, one I hadn't felt in decades, began to settle over me. There was no tearful reconciliation on the horizon, no magical healing of the deep, old wounds between my daughter and me. There was only the quiet, steady day-by-day work of building something new, a life that was entirely my own. Kevin stayed with me for the summer, a decision that saved us both, I think. We fell into an easy, comfortable rhythm of shared meals, old black and white movies that I loved and he pretended to enjoy, and long, meandering talks on my balcony overlooking the city. He filled my quiet, empty apartment with the vibrant, messy, wonderful energy of youth. And in his gentle, non-judgmental presence, I began to heal in ways I hadn't even realized I was broken. He was the bridge, not between me and Jessica, but between my painful, complicated past and a hopeful, simpler future. One sunny afternoon, I found myself scrolling through job listings at Denver General. I missed the structure, the camaraderie, the profound sense of purpose that comes from helping others. I missed being Nurse Simmons. On a whim, I applied for a part-time position in the hospital's patient advocacy department. It was a role that required all my years of experience, but none of the physical demands of floor nursing. A week later I had an interview. 2 hours after that I had a job offer. At 68 years old I was starting a new chapter, not one of retirement and quiet decline, but one of renewed purpose and active contribution. As I was leaving the hospital that day, my heart light with a new sense of possibility, I saw her. Jessica. She was standing near the main entrance in her white coat, looking stressed and tired, deep in conversation with a colleague. Our eyes met across the busy, bustling lobby. For a fleeting moment, the old me, the avoider, wanted to duck behind a pillar and disappear. But I didn't. I straightened my shoulders, gripped my cane and continued walking. She excused herself and approached me cautiously, as if I were a wild animal she wasn't sure would attack. Mom, she said, her voice quiet and cautious. What are you doing here? I had an interview, I replied simply, my voice calm. I start next week. Patient advocacy 3 days a week. She blinked, clearly stunned into silence. An awkward, heavy silence fell between us. How are you? I finally asked, the question feeling both inadequate and necessary. Managing, she said, her eyes dropping to the floor. The divorce will be final next month. Mark's already moved to Chicago. I'm sorry, I said, and to my own surprise I meant it. Whatever their monstrous flaws as a couple, divorce was a death, and I was sorry she was grieving. She studied me for a long moment, as if trying to decipher a difficult chart. Tyler seems happy staying with you. He's a remarkable young man, I said, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time. You should be proud of him. I am, she acknowledged, a flicker of genuine, unguarded emotion in her eyes. He's the one thing Mark and I did right. She hesitated, then took a small breath. Maybe we could have coffee sometime. To discuss, how we'll handle working in the same facility. It wasn't an olive branch. It wasn't an apology. It was a pragmatic truce offered by a weary soldier. But it was something. I'd like that, I replied. That evening, as Kevin and I celebrated my new job, I felt a sense of optimism I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer defined by my role as a mother, a wife, or a benefactor. I was Carol, a patient advocate, a friend, a grandmother, a survivor. At 68, I wasn't just learning how to walk again, I was learning how to live for myself. I learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's an act of survival. I learned that family isn't always about blood, it's about respect. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone, and for yourself, is to love them from a safe, healthy distance. This was my story, but I know I'm not alone. Have you ever had to make an impossible choice to protect your own peace? Have you ever had to set a boundary that broke your own heart? Please, share your experience in the comments below. Let's support each other, because your story matters. And if my journey resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories about navigating life's toughest challenges. Thank you for listening.